today is Tom Robinson from Adaptavate, who is a company that's sort of redefining the approach to building materials. Tom's journey began as a hands-on builder and plasterer before transitioning to sustainable architecture, where he developed Breather Board, a biocomposite alternative to plasterboard. He's won awards along the way, and has led Adaptavate becoming a pioneer in low carbon construction materials. And we're delighted to have him. And I've come clean. I've known Tom for some considerable time. And we are, as Eco Merchant, we've been a big advocate of his. His mission really is to build materials of the future that tackle both environmental challenges, climate change and carbon, and to reshape the construction industry. So Tom, welcome. Lovely to have you on board.
Thank you, Will.
I wanted to start, if I may, Tom, just because I think to give a bit of context about where your journey began. You were a builder, one of these people who had practical experience of working on building sites.
My sins.
Yeah, and I suppose that sort of really you yourself have told me, and I've read about you that was what helped you to decide to focus on sustainability. So how did that begin the process of this whole journey toward Adaptavate?
Yeah, but firstly, just thanks so many for having us on. I've always appreciated your support right from the first days that we were mixing Brie plaster, orange bell mix, and selling in potato sacks through Eco Merchant.
We still sold lots though, didn't we?
Yeah, and you continue to do so. So, and your team are great support. So, just great to be on this and having the first one, and great to see some lovely, friendly faces and familiar faces that are on today, and hopefully listening. Yeah, so I guess I sort of I started on working on a building site, predominantly working in kind of older buildings. I grew up in the Peak District. I was a kind of dirtbag climber, surfer, living around the world, kind of living in vans around the world, kind of originally, after my first degree. And then I kind of moved back home, and I sort of fell into building, really. I'd used building to earn money as I was sort of traveling around the world. It was always a good way of doing that. But really, when I sort of started back here in the UK, I focused on those historic properties, those kind of sandstone properties in the UK, restoring those. And I was really intrigued and curious as to how conventional modern materials were struggling to be compatible with those older solid wall masonry buildings that I was predominantly working on, brick, stone, quite friable stone, and how you had to be a bit more considerate in terms of the materials that you used and how you used them and all that sort of thing. And that what was also kind of interesting, and I love working with my hands, I still do, I'm building a tree house at the moment for the kids. I love working with timber.
I managed to avoid that, thank goodness.
Yeah.
I was pestered for a long time.
Yeah, and I just love the way that kind of making stuff with your hands and your brain just connects you into a completely different space. I spend most of my time now like looking at computers and talking, so it's and thinking. So it's really nice to be able to do that. But one of the things that was really interesting at that time was that I became increasingly aware that it was really difficult to get the skills that were in this kind of heritage historic building space. I know SPAB had good apprenticeships and whatnot, but it was really, these skills were dying, and I guess I really support this kind of idea that we need to continue those historic skills, in terms of stonework and masonry and lime plastering and thatching, and depending on where you are in the country, there are different cob building or whatever it is to your vernacular. But what I became increasingly intrigued about was how we kind of take the benefits of these like traditional types of materials and natural materials, but how we could actually make them fit for purpose for any builder, and really that was where it started, or indeed that homeowner, can people actually just pick these materials up and start to do it themselves? And so really, that then started this kind of discovery. I started working with people like Will Stanwix, working in hempcrete. I mean, he's super experimental. We'd be mixing things on site, for a commercial project, and he was like, all his customers were just willing for him to sprinkle magic dust in whatever the plaster was, and we would put it on the wall and see if it worked. And that just really gave me a super kind of innovative kind of mindset to how we can try things. Yeah, and then I took the plunge to go onto a sustainable architecture course, master's in sustainable architecture at the Centre for Alternative Technology, and I still remember to this day me. Hopefully the tax man's not listening, but I had a box of cash that I kept under my bed, and sold lots of stuff, and had a and took it over the admission office, and they looked at me like a three heads.
I'm intrigued by this because it's been good enough for people for a long, long time. We certainly at Eco-Merchant, we get people questioning the viability of natural materials, and then you point to buildings like St. Paul's, or etc. And it was good enough for many people. So I suppose when you look at this, the skill set and the heritage that we have has been established for centuries, and I'm not so sure that the skills are being lost. I think that they're just sort of hibernating. I think lots of the builders that I meet are perfectly okay. A good example for us would be, and for you, was when COVID hit and the gypsum shortage hit, and lots of plasterers who were sort of family businesses who could still work couldn't buy plaster because the builders merchants went over. So we had lots of people who were suddenly faced with applying allegedly traditional materials to buildings, and suddenly found out, actually, hang on, it's not that bad.
It's not that difficult. I think the synthetic revolution, fueled by the industrial revolution, last 100, post probably more like certainly the industrial revolution earlier, but post-war we've just been driven by efficiencies. And I think the built environment has been, has been a victim of that. It's because what people have done is we've moved into this space where it's all how to deliver it quicker. When you have craftsmanship about natural materials, and they're typically a bit harder to deal with maybe by perception. What it takes is people's time. Now, if you think about wallboard actually tracks the development curve of any country.
Right.
The amount of it per capita is actually the usage of it per capita per person.
We're talking about plasterboard here, yeah?
Yeah, plasterboard. It actually tracks the development curve of a country. So look at Southeast Asian market. They're using less than a meter squared per head per year. Whereas Europe is 7 square meters per head per year. And 11. So it's all just driven. It was driven by the speed of building, and through that we sort of lost this more considered approach. But I agree, and through that the skills, and I agree, people can still do it. It's just less predominant in the training facilities that we have. People consistently approach us like, can we do a sustainable building module with you? Are we the right people to do that? I'm not sure. Should businesses be getting involved in that, or should it be impartial? I don't know, but it's and so what I really tried to do was kind of take these natural materials that are better for the planet, better for the building, better for people, but kind of put them into modern applications, like a drop-in alternative to wallboard.
Well, I mean, gypsum plaster started emerging as a viable commercial alternative around about the late 1800s, about 1880 or so.
Yeah.
And I think the next big change obviously was plasterboard. So you're not putting on 30, 40 mil of plaster onto a wall. Yeah. You're putting a board onto it, and you're putting 5 mil of plaster onto it. But it still uses the same base raw material. I'm intrigued as well by what you were saying, because we're going to come on to this in a minute, about the efficiency, because it's who the beneficiary is. I mean, there's no doubt that when we look at buildings, certainly in the heritage market, but certainly monolithically constructed buildings, wet trades are the best way to get air tightness. Okay, it's a simple, straightforward slap it on,
Monolithic.
done. It's done. So it'll insulate. It improves your insulation, reduces air leakage through the building, manages moisture in a different way. There's a whole bunch of things going on. So all of this was going on in your head whilst you were going and doing your MSc. You'd taken your experience. You'd gone to CAT.
Yeah.
When and how did this effectively distill into Adaptavate as a branded business? When did you suddenly think, I should be formalizing this, I should be doing something with it?
Yeah, so I I was really it was really great to kind of do the studying and the building alongside. You know, the module, the way that the CAT Centre for Alternative courses are is you kind of go and do a residential week and you kind of immerse yourself in knowledge and people, and it's just super inspiring. And then you go back and I do 3 weeks, 3 weeks on the tools, as well as try to write my essays, and then I go back for another week. So you were able to really iterate, and through that and I did it all quite condensed.
2 years, I think you were there, weren't you?
Yeah, it was about 18 months basically.
Yeah.
I did it in about as short a period as you can, which was full-time courses. Then I wrote my thesis straight away. So yeah, it was kind of 18 to 24 months, something like that. And
was your thesis on breather board?
Yeah.
So yeah. Why? I mean, I suppose one of the other questions is why did no one else think of this?
I mean, we've got same with everything, isn't it? I mean, it's just a kind of triangulation.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and everyone's tapestry is different, right? So, it just so happens that combination of my things and my tapestry led me to do this. And I mean, we're still pretty unique. Like, you look at our IP portfolio. I mean, it's highly unique. So, I mean, but so I guess then I was you also through the CAT course you can design your own essay titles. So through my essays I was writing for my assessed work, I was actually looking at the gypsum availability. I was looking at breathability in buildings. I was looking at ways of measuring moisture buffering potential. So I was looking at these things through my own kind of learned experience. And so I got to when it was my thesis, and it was two things. It was one, I was going to look at algae as a biofuel, and look at like the cost benefit analysis of that and scaling that and what sort of thing. Or I was looking at designing a biocomposite alternative to plasterboard, was kind of the idea that was circular. I was really fascinated by Donahue and Brown-Gart's like Cradle to Cradle. It's one of the books that's really influenced.
I mean, it's a fabulous book.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just looking at it from the outside, I think you probably back the right horse with the board rather than the algae. Interesting as though that.
Yeah, algae is pretty interesting. I think if I had a bit more time, and I'd certainly be looking at that. And I think algae into building materials is kind of interesting as well as a byproduct of biofuels. So like, yeah, but we seem to the board seems to be.
So what triggered? What was it about the board that made you think there's a business here? So, I'm really intrigued as to so there's the concept of the idea. I might be onto something here.
Yeah.
Then you bump into everything else that you're going to bump into, which is you might think it's a good idea, but will other people?
Yeah.
Can you actually create one, even if it's only in the lab or it's in small scale, to do what you want it to do? Because that's going to uncover a whole bunch more problems and issues, or maybe opportunities that you didn't know you had. So the idea is you formalize this into a business called Adaptavate. Yeah.
Yes. So
that was when you started. That was when the thesis was written, and you decided to go board rather than algae. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote my thesis on different hemp inclusions on board and looked at different lining materials and if that affected breathability. And at the end of my thesis, I went, I've got something fairly interesting here on a performance level. Hygrothermally, I was really looking at moisture and thermal dynamics, and I also made some prototypes. So I forget to Bangor at the time, and a 1.2 by 0.8 board that I'd made in my mum and dad's conservatory, and kind of carried it very proudly round the university to the meeting I was going.
Thinking someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, "Do you want 40 million quid? This is a brilliant idea."
Yeah.
Like Dragon's Den.
Yeah, but that was at that time. Basically, what then happened is at the end of my thesis, I got something fairly interesting. People could see from my prototypes, the kind of half-scale board, that there was something interesting here from a builder's point of view. And then basically, I was doing some work for some friends that had this startup business and had been successful in getting on what was called Climate Kick Accelerator Program.
Yeah.
And I helped them build this aqua farm thing that they got funding for. And they said, "Oh, you should." I told them about what I'd done through my thesis, and they said, "Oh, you should apply for this entrepreneur competition." And anyhow, cut a long story short, I applied to that, got onto it, and ended up winning the
You won it, yeah.
European thing, and that gave me a place at Imperial College London.
So you were beginning to see that other people could see what you saw, which was that there was a monopoly. There was a monopoly situation on drywall on board for the UK
Probably
market.
haven't got that far, to be honest with you. I think it was just like there was an interesting thing here. What the accelerator did is it gave me the tools to go from being a builder to building the business.
Right.
And through that process, I was then given was like an MBA on the job. So I was given the tools to start to go, instead of just like, this is a board that has a better thermal conductivity than this thing, and look at all these great things about it. I was starting to understand what a value proposition was, how you get a minimum viable product, about how you scale a business, about milestones and funding requirements, and how you then get and different pots of money that
were you also looking at the same time at how the market would receive it? I mean, there's one of the things that you know, this is about the way we think as eco merchant, that we encounter two types of thinking. So we have manufacturers on one hand, which I would call factory forward thinking, and then you have customer demand on the other side, which I describe as shelf backward thinking. Yeah. So your factory forward thinking was developing at pace. You were going, we've got something viable here. I can see a route. I can see how I might be. The resources are there for help me develop it. Were you also at the same time thinking backwards from the shelf, going, what would a customer think of this? How will the building trades and the specifiers, the architects and the designers view this product? Because that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, so I think I always started with a bloody big problem. The Good to Great book by Jim Collins. Start with a BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal, and it's typically like I don't believe in technology push. I think it needs to be market pull. I think is kind of a different way of describing what you're talking about. So I think even just in the kind of idea of the product, and that it is a kind of drop-in alternative to standard wallboard, it's used and installed in exactly the same way, made it easier for adoption. So I was already thinking about that just by the design of the thing. Then it comes down into, and we constantly optimize that, right? But then it comes down into how you position the offering into the market and how you communicate that.
So against incredibly entrenched interest, because as we were, I think the figure was quoted was 90.9% of the market is owned by 3 companies.
Yeah, and I'd say that was
these aren't people who are going to give up their market position easily. So you're kind of up against it right from the start. So
you are, yeah. And people looked at me like, the amount of, you have to have some pretty thick skin, right? The amount of no's, and you're mad, and you do know that'll take you 10 years, or whatever, or you'll never do it. It's just sort of par for the course.
It's the Richard Thayer thing, isn't it? From nudging. So you've been nudging this bit by bit along the way. So
yeah,
was there a timeline when you started? Do you think this is going to take me 10 years to do this, or was there?
I thought it was. I remember having a conversation with my uncle, who's in kind of startup and scale up world as well over in North America, and he was like. I was like, yeah, I think I'll get, it'd take me 2 years, because I was thinking about going and doing a PhD. That was after my master's, I was like, maybe I'll go and do a PhD and really get into the technical detail of this thing. And he was like, look, this is going to take you at least 5 or 6 years to develop.
Oddly enough, that really does raise an interesting point, because we have this conversation time and time again. Is that we spend a lot of time, eco merchant, in the technical sphere, talking to technical people, and a lot of it, actually, if I'm honest, is beyond me. I've learned as I've gone along, but what we do find is that a lot of the people who are using these products and buying them have either no interest or a passing interest in the technical side of it. Yeah. If it looks like plasterboard, behaves like plasterboard, but gives you some additional features. Yeah. Okay. Then the decision will be, the first question they're going to ask you is, how much does it cost? Because if it's 6 times the price, I'm not interested. Yeah. So so in some respects, have you felt it necessary for your funding and to develop this network of support network you've got that's enabled you to weight more heavily towards the technical, always solving technical issues? Because at the end of the day, it is a functional utility product, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It really does depend on the stakeholder you're talking to, Will. And I think
Right.
everyone will understand that on this call. I communicate very differently if I'm talking to a university professor that I'm trying to, inspire that we need to do a collaboration project together, to the way I speak to an architect that they need to specify it, to the way I talk to a funder, to the way I talk to government, like
How do you encapsulate that in the brand, though? Because that's such a difficult thing. You can do it
it's a really
personally.
complex thing. And the other thing that we've got is, of course, we've got products on the market like Breather Plaster family that's sold, through eco-merch and wherever
And
else,
elsewhere.
and
Yes,
and
let's
and
be
wherever
fair
else
to
you
it.
get your builders merch. Yeah,
Sells
builders.
itself, the breather plaster, though. I mean, but that's taken a while.
But
That's
yeah,
taken a long while too.
yeah, so you've got a product offering, but we're a technology company. I mean, I don't know how much people know about Adaptavate, but really we're kind of more like an Intel Inside, i.e. we develop carbon negative building materials and formulations and processes. And our business model is to license that technology to building product manufacturers around the world because we're driven by speed of impact, right?
Right.
Building our strength about developing materials to be able to then deploy large amounts of capital by these partners into big production assets to get it through their distribution channels into the market with their trusted brand. So we're an Intel Inside, not a Toshiba, if you know what I mean, or a
Well,
Dell.
again, this I think was picked up on a thread on, oddly enough, on ACAN the other day, which was, we've done the technical side to death. We can't do any more. We can't, it is what it is. We explain a lot. What is the we're missing? It's not getting a pickup from the market. What is it that the people who, it's survivorship bias, isn't it, in behavioral economics? Where we're as interested, if not more interested, in people who are not buying it than the people who are. The people who are much more simple and straightforward to satisfy because they know what questions to ask, and we're often just in a matter of passing on information or explaining the details. So it's the people who are not buying. What questions are they asking that means they're saying no to changing from one product to another? So if you're looking at your plasterboard, if you position this as a plasterboard replacement, for example, then what is it, the questions that people are asking that would lead them to say, no, I'm sticking with plasterboard?
I just
That's a behavior, it may be a behavioral thing or a framing thing about where you look at it from. Okay, so I mean, part of it is I suppose if you take breather board will help the internal air quality. Okay, you get like lime plaster; it has a benefit on indoor air quality. It has thermal properties as well. So, do you find yourself saying to people, focusing on those features of the performance of the product, saying that this improves indoor air quality, or this reduces heat loss, this manages through air tightness, etc. Are those the elements of the products that you end up stressing and focusing on as well?
it really does depend on the stakeholder. Really depends. So I mean, like first rule of this stuff is listen more and ask questions more than talk for us. Like we just want to understand what your drivers are, what you're trying to achieve, and have a complete humble recognition that we might not be fit for you. Right? So
Yeah, which is very refreshing and compelling in its own right. Yeah.
yeah. And as a business, yeah, we're here to sell products, but we're here to make like our overall endeavor is to leave the planet in a better place. I don't know, that sounds altruistic, and you might go, that's great. That sounds like, completely like shite, and I can tell you it's not. Like every
So
single
you only want customers who care.
I'm not saying that. No, I'm not saying that actually. I want customers that don't care. And if I've got customers that don't care, I've done really well. Right? Because what I've done is what we've done is we've taken a performance material that's better for the planet, but we put it in the hands of someone that would never, ever, ever use it.
Which is it would be a stroke of genius if we could. So the specifiers who are specifying at the moment associate not only with the performance characteristics of the brand, but do you think they also associate with your ethos as a business, as a culture, as a business?
Um, yeah. So I think like there's quite a few threads open here that kind of all interweave. What we do is we have a solid, pioneering technical foundation to our technology and products. They have to do what the standards say, right? They have to be safe. in a conservative and risk averse and quite rightly so industry that's also conservative. So we have to play that. That is a key part of the game we play, right? And why and what we do. So our labs here can test all the highest standards. We've built an EPD calculation tool to the highest standard. That is a core of our offering. On top of that, then people want to understand what the product can do for them, and it's always them at the center of it, or it can for their client. And that we can tailor, depending on who it is. So yes, it's moisture buffering. Yes, it's thermally acoustic, thermally insulating. Yes, it's acoustic, depending on what those people are. But then really people are encaptured by the story. And I've probably gone the wrong way round. I think it's probably more likely what we do is we get massive buy-in because of our global endeavor. Okay, to be globally pioneering in this space, to completely rethink the materials in the construction industry, to capture CO2 from the atmosphere or emissions and put them into building materials that everyone can use.
I think the story is absolutely, for us, I think the story is really important because a lot of the people who come to,
Yeah, people get that, and people get like the people that know that we started putting in potato sacks, and we've got the pictures up on the wall. The people that come here and meet our team, they get that there's a story here, which is a builder turned business builder, and with a global ambition of completely rethinking the material flows with the planetary bounds in mind, and making profit as a byproduct. That is something that resonates with people. What we're then doing is we're then bringing people into what we call our tribe. So for people that are using and we're really piloting at the moment, one of our Pete, our technical installation specialist, is building this tribe on a platform, which is architects, in trades, homeowners, specifiers, whoever you are can come there and you can ask questions and you can cross-fertilize all these different things. Yes, about our products. Yes, about our stuff, but also how do you overcome a vapor barrier, blah de blah, on a building like this? How did you overcome use of natural materials with this sort of client? So what we're trying to do is not just say, look, here are our materials. What we're trying to say is, look, here's a community we can be part of. And so I think story, find your tribe, then technical performance, and then solid certification underpinning.
I think I think I've seen in reality with you as well. I mean, there's the Kanu model, which is a Japanese, which is utility attributes, performance attributes, and what he called delight attributes. Utility attributes are the ones where it's just got to do what it says it does. Otherwise, you're not going to buy it again.
You're not going to play. Yeah.
No, performance attributes are the ones where you say it's designed to perform like this. I suppose the interesting thing with the performance attribute is that, and probably why the very large market or the developer market might be more difficult to crack, is that the benefits of all the installation of the product don't accrue to the person who's profits by selling it. It's to the homeowner. Okay, so there's an incentive not necessarily to provide the least you can.
So this is a really interesting point. So what we're getting better as a team is communicating the value the different value propositions to people in the value chain.
So right? Can you give us an example of how you might do that?
Yeah, okay. So we've just hired Tim, brought Tim onto our team, who I'm sure some of you know because he's got the most outrageous shirts. But he's also a really top, a lovely bloke.
I shall start calling him Tim de Chemise.
Don't judge him by his shirts, all right? But he's come from big corporate, background, right? And so what we're doing here with working with Tim and the fabric of our DNA, what we're doing is meshing those two things together. What we're trying to get better at doing is understanding what the distributors need to understand about our product. What is it key for them to know the single-minded proposition? Right? We're improving our clarity on a single-minded position. If you only take one thing from the conversation, take this one thing, because the brain, every single value proposition or thing that sits underneath that one thing is detracting from that main thing. the human brain is like, by adding more value propositions to that person, you're actually detracting from the main thing, therefore making it less than likely to engage
So
them.
finding the main thing is one of the things you're focused on, yeah?
But that's different for the distributor or the merchant as it is for the architect, as it is for the contractor, as it is for the end user. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to furnish each of those stakeholders with the right value proposition that they see and that they have to communicate to the person that they have to influence. So in the merchants, it would be what's good for them, i.e., there's more profit per pallet, let's just say, on our products than there is to other plasters. Okay, more profit per pallet for you. That's why you want to take it into your shops. But the value proposition that your contractors need to know, okay, your customers need to know, is that this is for mold and damp and it's easy to install. It's the same installation times as standard plasters. Or, we could, whatever it is for that kind of area or part of the market or whatever. What's that single-minded proposition? The contractors need to know, right, here's a sheet for the contract. The contractor needs to know this is fast to install, so you get better profitability per project. It's a unique product, and you can give that to your end market. And what's the single-minded proposition for your customer, the homeowner maybe in this instance, is that this is a product that takes away problems with mold and damp, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, then what you've done is you've really minimized the friction in that value chain. You've got a better clarity on the messaging to each of the stakeholders. It's not just a soup of stuff, and you're then enabling the flow better enabling the flow through that value chain. And that, to be honest with you, just to finish that thought,
sorry.
Some people say, "Why the hell did you launch Breather Plaster at the same time you were trying to, develop a new board?"
I think I might have been one of them.
Yeah, you were. No, you were. And then you were asking me whether or not we can pigment it over and over again, which is a good question. And still, I'm not sure that's the mainstream market. But anyhow, maybe we'll pick that one up another time. The point here is that launching Breather Plaster into the market through people like you and now into all the other merchants that we're involved in and architects and the thousands of projects we're on has taught us how to communicate what the brand is and what the brand isn't. It's built a value chain that we can prove that we've done something. It generates revenues. So from a funding point of view, that's very useful in terms of scaling. It's an evidence base, an operational business. And that's incredibly powerful as we evidence that we can scale these things.
Do you think that your brand started off with this ambition or has acquired these characteristics? Because there's no doubt, I mean, I'm sure that amongst our customers, we have people who use Adaptavate for status signaling. Oh, Adaptavate, breather plaster on the walls. I just think because I think the brand is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you as well when you're certainly when you're entering into new markets. Yeah. So it goes back to the question I asked towards the beginning is that I think there will be people on this call. I think there's people who watch this who will learn when you say to learn something new when you say that you're effectively a technology, you're an R&D business.
Well, we've got a tension between products and R&D, and those messages are slightly different, right?
I agree. And yet they see the Adaptavate A on the bag, the sort of turquoise logo. It's a recognizable logo. And it's that association with that brand that I think does some of the work for you in that connectivity. The other thing I was going to say is as a merchant as well, don't forget that we also have to recognize these buying signals or what people regard as important, however you describe it.
Yeah.
And I suppose in some respect it concerns me a little bit that we could all become over niche with this and just think, well, it's just blokes like us with beards who buy, and sort of ex-hippies who buy lime plaster because it's right. There is no doubt that the technical side of it is a performance material. There are so many things that plaster can do, lime plaster can, whether it's in a bag or whether it's in a board. Yep. in terms of calcinization, for example, so the way it stores carbon. I mean, that's one of the things I did want to ask you about, and bearing in mind that you might want to keep some of this a little bit under wraps and be a little bit guarded, but the carbon sequestering side of this, the breather board.
Yeah.
That intrigues me. I'm not going to say anything because I came to the factory and I had a look and wasn't really allowed to, but you were very kind enough to show me a special room. But there is something fundamentally important going on about carbon with this product, with your breather board, about how it carbon sequesters. I'm sure people would. I'll leave you to tell us how, but that carbon story as well, again, that must be one of the drivers moving forward. The closer we get to 2050, the more important this will become. But can you just give us some insight without giving away any secrets you don't want to give away
Yeah,
about
sure.
how
So
the board works?
there's a couple of points in there. So I'll pick the carbon one up in a second. There was a point that you were making at the start, which I think is really valuable, which is why do people care? This technical underpinning that you said. Actually, what people want, particularly in the domestic market, is what we're trying to do, excuse me, is really connect people back to their third skin. So, our first skin, we care so much about what we put on it. Our second skin represents who we are, in terms of our clothes. But the third skin of our buildings directly impact the health, right? And how big your house is a kind of, in a demonstration to many people about how, happy or wealthy you are, or whatever.
Do you think people who live in big houses always make good choices because they're smart?
Oh, for sure.
I'm sure. I'm
That was
sure there's
like
a correlation.
sarcastic. Yeah, just for, any translation or algorithm that's, no, I mean, whatever your view on that is, like I'm not going to get into, but the point here is that the building materials that you make these buildings out of can directly impact your health. And so what we're doing, like the clothing industry has done very well, is that you're not really bothered about how many micrograms of H2O that your material can absorb or desorb and blah blah blah. Like, what the SI unit, how they've developed that is not that important. What you just want to know is that it breathes with your body and it then reduces the amount of sweat and it makes you smell less. So what we're doing is we're trying to use what works in other industries. So our business model is almost taken from the chemicals industry, loads of variable feedstocks around the world, put through an industrial process to make an internationally standard product. So local production hitting international standards.
The utility is done, and then the
Yeah,
performance
there's an analog.
becomes embedded in.
Yeah, we're just transposing it into the building products industry on a global scale. Now, when we look at materials and the products that we sell in through merchants and breather plaster and board, what we're doing is we're saying, look, the materials that you make your houses of directly affect your health. That's pretty much understood. Now, think of them like breathable clothes or performance clothes, and think about them like that, and then that might connect you back to it in a really meaningful way, because buildings, shelter is a foundational element of Maslow's hierarchy. However, we've become disconnected with that a little bit because it's all been about a show of wealth or whatever.
There is a lot of status thing, but there's a lot of sunk cost as well in this as well. I mean, you are talking about changing. Let's come back to carbon point in a second, but you are looking at an industry where, especially over the past 15 to 20 years, an enormous amount of consolidation has taken place no matter where you look. So the number of big builders merchants is down to about 4 or 5 groups. The number of plasterboard manufacturers is down to 3. The number of brick manufacturers, if there are any left, is really down to 1. So the timber's the same. So this consolidation and this tendency for the market to work towards lowest common denominator delivery is definitely thwarting innovation. So this is the challenge that I think that you've, from the outside, Tom, I think you've done particularly well. You've become a recognized brand. It's that. So I'm sure that it is this kind of thinking. I'm intrigued as to how you communicate it.
Okay.
And part of that is through this. Part of that links to the carbon message, because the carbon message gave you a platform.
Yeah, okay. And we've evolved, right? We have adapted as we've built and evolved, like
Adaptavate,
we've adapted and innovated. Yes, indeed. Well, that's such a good combination of words.
Just on that, did it come from innovate and adapt and adapt? Is that where it came from?
I mean, it's about as blatant as it sounds.
Yeah, it's a bit of a student.
I'm not that bright. I just 2 words. Well, adaptation was a core part of my course, right? A CAT.
Right.
So it was like adapt, and I think much to the point of your point you made before, science has got a lot of the answers. We need to adapt the society, right? So it's an innovation that's part of adaptation. So Adaptavate sounded, but that's kind of grown, that's kind of caught on and is quite good. Like lots of people say, I want your Adaptavate plaster. They don't actually know what breather plaster is. But so just about this kind of, David Goliath thing that's going on, right? Which is kind of what you're describing a few moments ago. And maybe we'll drop into carbon.
It's intimidating.
It is. But, I mean, I liken business to climbing big mountains, right? All all stuff like that's pretty scary when you look at the big bloody mountain, you know, and you think about how many days it's going to take you to climb or whatever, and the preparation that needs to go into that. But you know, the underpinning of that is just a deep humility about not bullshitting yourself, being really clear and transparent about what's going on, about what the weather's doing, about the risks that you're going to take, about the size of the endeavor, and then having trust about the people that you've got around you and building the team accordingly, and then planning the expedition step by step and not thinking about standing on the top, just thinking about taking one step as it comes. My dad always said, you know, Edward Wintford, just take one look wisely to a step, just keep taking one step. My job as a CEO that I've evolved into is that, you know, I keep on talking about what the summit, you know, what the mountain could look like and about where the vision is, but I'm absolutely laser focused on how we get there and how our team, and this comes back to the David Goliath point, how our team are very clear on what the objectives are for the next year or 18 months or phase.
So on the David and Goliath thing, the one thing that gypsum can't do is can't have a carbon profile of breather board. It's a high energy input. It's a carbon rich product. So it's got a lot of embodied carbon in. It also has some other particularly unwelcome side effects. One is disposal. It's not particularly easy to recycle.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at this, going back, I just want to bring us back to that carbon point again, because one of the things that intrigued me was this ability of lime to sequester carbon and to put that to good use. Because that's one of the things that does seem to unlock, it is a real differentiator between your product and a gypsum plasterboard. Okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, let's be reasonable about it. It's a £1.5 billion market. As a business, even if you only took 1%, you'd be doing very nicely. But
yeah, it's 60 billion USD globally. Like, it's a bloody big market. It's third most
huge.
In the
it's
world.
Absolutely massive.
Yeah.
So the carbon side of the product, the breather board sequesters carbon. It's as simple as that, is it?
So I don't really prescribe kind of saying what plasterboard is or isn't. Okay, like plasterboard is just plasterboard. I think depending on where you are in the world, you've got different pressures. Okay, so gypsum is the main feedstock that kind of comes from coal-fired power stations or out the ground, and depending on where you are sat on geologically and what your energy mix is, you've got varying levels of availability. Okay, so but it's got similar issues as the automotive industry has. It needs to migrate from IC engines to EV propulsion, essentially, and maybe then hydrogen. So there's a transition going on, okay? And likewise, the wallboard industry, as with all industrial elements, has got a transition going on through decarbonisation, but also resource security, okay? And that looks different for depending on where you are in the world. Now, so, you know, I'm not going to sit here and slate plasterboard. That's not what's going to happen, right? Because I've had enough letters.
We're the same. We don't slag it off. We just,
but you can.
We point out the fundamental differences, and
there's differences. So what about this carbon technology? So, and this is an example of how we've adapted, and how I have a phrase here about how we be more bunny. So our job every day is to be the bunnies that go in the rabbit warrens that put all these things together, really agile and nimbly, where the elephants can't get at. The elephants are the corporates, you know, that have these kind of big tankers that kind of move, and we're the rabbits that are kind of finding the answers to the future solutions of our market and industry. So be more bunny is a sort of phrase that everyone laughs at in our
well, it's going back to Daniel Kahneman's System A and System B, isn't it? So the way you think. But sorry, carry on.
So basically, we started off with the white technology. So the whiteboard is, what breather board was originally known as. And we, about 4 years ago, got really into how EPDs were developing and how, so environmental product declarations, a form of life cycle assessment. And the landscape on this is constantly transitioning. You have to think what Adaptavate really is how construction materials, carbon, and capital interface on a global level, right? And how industrial processes can make that happen, okay? So what we said was we ultimately want to be at a place where our building materials are essentially a form of carbon credit in a fiscal market, right? Because if we can do that, we help people reduce the embodied carbon of the building. We help bring CO2 from the atmosphere or from emissions into building materials, and we create buildings as for carbon storage.
just let me pick up on that, is you actually put carbon, which can be waste emitted carbon, into the board
So
and lock it away.
exactly. Yeah. So our white technology was taking plants, binding them together with calcium carbonate, interfacing it between two pieces of paper, and putting it into walls. But then the way EPDs were, 15804, the standard, was changed from A1 to A2. Now, plants absorb CO2, you put them into the product, and then the rules on the standard is that after 60 years, that CO2 that the plants have absorbed has to be released. It's called biogenic carbon. Now, in the old standard, you could just lock it all up, but it changed. So 15804 A2 is now saying that that biogenic carbon is released. And so when we saw this change about 4 years ago, we realized that biomaterials are going to struggle to claim carbon negativity.
Yeah, yeah.
We aren't in here for greenwashing. We're in here for genuine planetary benefit. So what we then set on doing was migrating towards a way in which we could find ways to get lock carbon into the fabric of our materials. One of the ways in which we saw doing that was this thing called biochar. So now what we can do is we can take cellulosic, lignocellulosic waste, so paper pulp waste, agroforestry waste, some projects we've got going on with human waste, biofuel byproducts, that sort of stuff that's, increasing in abundance due to the migration towards the bioeconomy and biofuels, as well as wastes are everywhere, right? And so you open up these feedstocks that are kind of globally available. And what we do is we put them into what's called a pyrolysis process. And that's essentially making charcoal on an industrial scale. And what you do there is you create this industrial process that locks this carbon into stable state that takes it to beyond 100 years permanence. And now when you look at the planetary bounds and the regulations that the UN has set, biochar as a use into, commodity materials is a massive use case to how we transition towards decarbonisation of our planet or our species.
The embedded carbon in the product itself is always plant derived. I mean, I've just seen a question about what is it made of. Yeah. I think I had a pretty good handle, but the recipe can be in flux.
That's essentially calcium carbonate, and the white technology uses biomaterial, and this is biochar. This is carbon negative. And so what we've done through this modeling and through independently verified results and this tool that we've built is essentially optimize the development of our product to be carbon negative when looking at EPD 15804 A2, but also has some significant other benefits in terms of, an EPD isn't just.
Do you still infuse the boards with waste carbon dioxide so the calcinization takes place or is that done in the biochar process itself?
So there's a number of things there, and I've got to be careful about what I say here, but yes, we do
want to be
a number of different ways. Yeah. So one of the things that when we look at the industrial ecosystem of the future, much like steel plants were co-located with coal, iron ore, and water, what we're looking at is taking CO2 that people are increasingly getting charged for. Emitters are getting charged to emit CO2, right, per ton. And we can take that CO2 by co-location, and we can reduce that cost of CO2 emission by using that CO2 in our curing processes.
Which is that's the bit that really got me the first time, because I just told myself is you, instead of peeing it into the atmosphere, yes, you can actually have a pipe coming out the factory, plugging into the unit where it's being, and it is effectively being absorbed by the board. And then the EPD change is a really interesting one, because this is across the board: timber, wool, any of the natural materials.
Industrial processes, cement, lime, right? And like co-location, you'd also have an anaerobic digestion plant online, because actually putting our material into an anaerobic digestion actually increases the amount of biogas you can create from that, because foodstuffs are typically quite acidic, our material is quite alkaline, and the balance of those two things increases syngas. But the thing is, right, is that we have modeled this with an independently verified EPD tool. Okay, so we are really confident about where the CO2 is emitted through calcium carbonate and how much we're putting in and how much we're not, and how that's modeled coming back. And we conservatively estimate all these things, right? The other thing that's in tension, and this might be kind of interesting for the audience here, is that the building product lens, i.e. an EPD on a building product, is sort of in tension at the moment with the planetary decarbonisation regulations. So, for instance, biomaterials are actually a form of carbon dioxide and removal. right? But they're not recognized as being like that sequestration of carbon is not recognized in EPDs because they're less tthan 100 years.
I mean, an EPD conversation would be a really interesting one for another day. And there's a couple of people that I'm intrigued. I think there's an awful lot of people that look at an EPD currently, and I mean, there aren't very many. It's like having a good tax accountant. There's lots of accountants who'll tell you they understand tax. There's lots of people tell you they understand EPDs. But I think there are different versions, different types of EPD, and I think a lot of people just end up sort of kind of somewhat exhausted by it, just going, well, it's got an EPD, so fine.
Agreed. And all that people need to take away here is that that's at the heart of everything we do, is how we optimize our products for our customers, which is in this instance, production partners. It's at the heart of everything we do. You're right, it's complex. We're improving the way that we communicate this. But yeah, hear your point.
So all of this wraps up. So just beginning to wind down. So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes to go. Yeah. I'm just intrigued really about how you're going forward. How do you see this? The best way to probably describe it from what you've said is reframing it, because it's kind of a problem everybody appreciates. It's just working out how you want it. So you want it to be in the voice of the listener rather than the voice of the speaker. So what you're getting is you're identifying with your audience to go where they go, I get it. Okay. Whereas if you describe it a different way, they don't pick up on it as much. So this kind of reframing of it. So the board, the future for the board, just relatively briefly, where are we and where do you see them going, sort of reframe position?
Yeah, I guess it's really clear. So we've successfully delivered our pilot line, co-funded by the government. The product's hitting standard EN 520 or exceeding it. And we've got interest from end users, like a press release the other day, which was about British Land project that we've been involved with, and Overbury, biggest developer in the UK. We've got some really exciting announcements coming up. So there's real evidence of commercial traction here in the UK, but also around the world.
And I did promise myself I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to blooming do it anyway. But in terms of price point, I'm not asking for a price, obviously, but I'm saying in terms of price point, are you in a place that makes it attractive?
Yeah, technical wallboard. So we're cost competitive with technical performance wallboards, right? So moisture board, fireboards, and that
acoustic plasterboard, that kind of thing.
Plasterboard, like so we're right in that, and that's 30 to 40% of the market. And then in 5 to 6 years' time, we can be cost competitive with plasterboard, standard,
which is a 300 to 400 million pound market.
Here in the UK, well,
here in the UK,
50 billion. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's for somebody like a merchant who presents to market and to specifiers and building designers and architects, that's really useful to know.
Yeah, so, and then the cost of carbon and the value of carbon is going to be interesting. And I think that's maybe a conversation for another day. But if you think about how regulations are going to drive everyone to try and decarbonize buildings, but there's going to be a lack of supply of carbon negative building materials because we've not developed them. So then it actually becomes about this kind of supply demand dynamics, and that's going to be in super intention. So that really then leads as being as pioneering in that place. So the price of carbon versus the value of carbon in the marketplace and the value of these materials is going to be inflated because there'll be a low supply of them, right? So that's going to be interesting, and how the carbon markets that deliver and where they go and how regulation looks. But the next steps are to go and build a demonstrator. So I'm closing funding round right now. We'll be opening another funding round. We're looking to broker a collaborative kind of partnership with production partners and supply chain partners to deliver that demonstrator. So I'll be opening a funding round sort of middle of this year, closing early next year to go and deliver that demonstrator. We've already got active negotiations with a number of people around the world on that. And that will really prove the industriality of our process. And our ultimate aim is to license to people around the world, global companies, regional companies, see this as being about 10%, 10 to 15% within the next 10 to 15 years of their markets. And so this demonstrator really unlocks the industriality of that for them to build plants at that sort of scale.
I'm delighted to hear it. And the other thing that I think is if you are relatively cost competitive to a gypsum-based board, then I think you have a very, very bright future with this. And personally, at Eco Merchant, we'd love to have it on board as soon as we can get it. But we know, Tom, we're coming to the end of the hour. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask this of all my guests.
Yeah.
And the 3 questions are, simple one, recommend me a good book. Recommend us a good book that or a resource that had a serious impact on the way that you'd be able to change the way you think about a business.
So I guess for me, there's only one obvious answer. It was
I've written it down on a bit of paper, and I'm gonna, go on then. What have you picked?
is Let My People Go Surfing, the story of a reluctant businessman.
The
Just a book.
journey or the story of a reluctant businessman, Yvon Chouinard. Yeah,
Yvon Chouinard, yeah. So it was a book that my best mate that I was traveling with and living in a van in Canada gave me in 2011
it's
or
a
whatever it
it's a
was as a
wonderful.
dirt bag.
And of course, and I think that the business itself there, you let my people go surfing. I think the Patagonia as a business itself truly reflects the ethos of the book.
It was a chronicle of how a business can be set up to do
You're not
good and
sponsored
then
by
do
them, are
well.
you? I noticed you're wearing a
I know,
Patagonia.
yeah.
So,
No,
so
not currently, but that could be an option. But what's really good is that it just chronicles through the financial processes they've gone through. It's the story, but also the philosophies of how they build the business. And still, every single person that comes in through the door here to work with us on our endeavor gets a copy as a kind of welcome to our tribe. Yeah,
I
so
think
that's
that's one of
that's the goal. I could list lots of good books, but
yeah.
that's
I only asked you to pick one, which you've
yeah.
done. Thank you. And then, right, so one piece of advice. Maybe something that anything you kind of wish you'd known earlier that made a difference to the way you think about
I
your
I think
business.
I really struggle with advice because I'm making it up as I go along, right? So, and I don't sit in any position of authority or all knowing.
Advice you were given by someone
But
else.
I think that the thing that served me well is balance grit with humility and always
Right.
be in pursuit of the truth. You've got to have a shit ton of grit, and you've got to have more than you think. And it'll come in ebbs and flows and all that sort of thing. But you've just got to balance it with humility. To do the job that I do and we do, you've got to be in pursuit of the truth, not being right.
Yeah. Well, I think sound advice to anybody. And then the last thing is just one thing, one moment in your career where there was personal, professional shift in your behavior
Yeah, so
changed
after
the course of your work or business.
So I'm going to actually give a kind of slightly challenging one here, which is I think you've probably worked out now I'm fairly transparent. But actually, after 2022, we raised our first VC round to kind of and government funding to kind of build this place, and we went from 4 or 5 hairy blokes in a damp shed to building a world leading business, blah blah blah, VC backed, right? And the transition I had to go through to be a CEO was massive. 6, 9 months later, burnout comes. I've got a young family. I didn't know myself. Like it was just pretty gnarly. And I just had to have like that reflection, which was you need to look after yourself. You need to balance, how this business evolves, how you evolve within this business. We already have this mantra here, which is like the All Blacks, you only wear the shirt for a period of time and really just have to leave that in a better place. The endeavor is way greater than any one of us, me included, so but that was a really tough time where I had to really deeply look at what my job was, what I had to do, what I was and what I wasn't, how I can balance my family, myself, and the business I serve, and the people I serve through the business. And I guess that moment in like late 22, early 23, and it's happened a couple of times in different ways, but you just have to get to know yourself a bit better and be honest with yourself about that. So yeah,
Well, I'm delighted for you. Having followed your journey, I'm thoroughly impressed by what you've done, and I'm very encouraged by what you will do. And so, Tom Robinson, CEO of Adaptavate, thank you so much for being our first guest on the first branded Thinking Aloud that we've done.
well, I really appreciate
very much
Will.
to everyone who's joined in and everyone who watches. So
Yeah,
we'll see you again next time.
thanks a million, Will, and thanks for the opportunity. It's been great to be part of. I've always
My
appreciated
pleasure.
it. So thank you.